AITA for telling my in-laws my parents ate my pet? NTA. Your family are assholes, though. They ate your pet, you got over it, and you told a funny story over dinner as people do, and now your mom is pissed that you told the truth about something that you made clear doesn't really bother you? Her fragile ego is showing. FFS, tell her to get over herself. Edit, just noticed the username. Love it. NTA. It's either no big deal and they shouldn't worry what people think about it, or it was a big deal and shitty thing to do and they have to live with the consequences of the choice, but it can't be both. NTA. Your parents handled that badly as a child, and if they didn't want that story repeated now as an adult, they should probably make amends with you for how they botched it all in the first place. I have no idea what your family's financial circumstances were growing up, but if the lamb needed to be eaten, it never should have been presented to you as a pet in the first place, but instead as an animal to care for until it was time to slaughter. If your family wasn't hard up for money and just iced your pet so they could cook it up because they felt like it, then what happened with your fiancé's parents was karmic justice. Edited to add, it's common to use humor as a deflection for childhood trauma. NTA. If they knew it was wrong, then they shouldn't have done it. My grandparents ate my rabbits after lying to me about giving them to a lovely family. I have loved them less a little after that. Edit, the absolutely awful part was that they were presented as pets and were played with almost every day. They even bought a rabbit harness for them. I wouldn't have named them and scooped rabbit poop at 6 a.m. if they were just food. NTA. Well, they shouldn't have eaten your pet if they don't want to be viewed as monsters. NTA, Clarice. NTA. If they handled it correctly when you were child, you may still eat lamb and never had even thought to bring it up as a funny tale. Well, if she thinks she is a monster for eating her child's pet, why did she eat it in the first place? NTA. I don't think you were wrong to share the story as something funny that happened. I suspect your mom is just stressed out and wants to make a good impression with your in-laws. She may have already been self-conscious and thinking that you'd help present the family in its best light, and then when you told the story it felt like a public criticism. NTA. Don't eat a child's pet if you don't want to look unhinged because you ate a child's pet. It's not hard. NTA. Your fiancé is right, your mother is a bit crazy. That's a hugely unnecessary reaction over something that was meant to be a joke. NTA. You didn't mean it in a malicious way, it was completely meant as a funny story. Maybe your in-laws will judge her, but it really isn't a big deal and she overreacted. NTA. They knew they were going to eat the lamb, but neither parent gave you a heads up nor apologized for their actions. It would be a different story if she owned up to it, but she hasn't. She's a monster for eating her daughter's pet, and acting like it's no big deal. NTA. Your mother as much as admitted eating the lamb made them monsters. How can you argue with that? NTA. If they didn't want to be known as the family who ate their kid's pet lamb, then perhaps they shouldn't have eaten the lamb. Or at least explain to you from the get-go that it was food rather than let you see it as a pet to begin with. As for your mother, how fragile is her ego for her to be freaking out over something when it's evident that neither you, your fiancé, or your fiancé's family really care about it? NTA. My roommate in college was a farm girl and many of her pets were eaten by her family. We had little wakes in the apartment for the ones she raised by hand, but her family aren't monsters for raising livestock. NTA. My dad grew up on a farm, and I spent a few years there during childhood, too. We've all got stories of pets being eaten, and it's always half sad / half funny, but it's not embarrassing, and no one thinks anyone is a monster. NTA. If your parents didn't want people to know that they ate your pet, then they shouldn't have eaten your pet. Full stop. NTA. I concur that your parents sound like monsters. NTA. it is a funny story. NTA, but I think you're underreacting to the situation. NTA. Your mom is crazy. NTA. OP, it doesn't matter how long you had that lamb. You loved it as a pet, so it was a pet. The fact she says it doesn't matter because you only had it for a few weeks might be something she makes herself believe to make it less awful. I think she might have gotten mad because she knows it was a bad thing to do and you exposed it to your future in-laws. If you grew up making jokes about it, of course you will think it is okay to mention to others. It is all just your mother's conscience that makes you the bad guy. NTA. If she's still hung up about it, then she shouldn't have eaten it in the first place. She needs to let go. If the truth is embarrassing, they shouldn't have behaved that way. Look. Either eat animals and own it, or don't eat them in the first place. Your mum is just being hypocritical about it. NTA. NTA. If you don't want people knowing you ate your child's pet, don't eat your child's pet. If your position is that it's a meat animal, tell people, it wasn't a pet, it was a meat animal. NTA, I have family members that farm and friends that own farms. This past year we raised 2 pigs on my friend's farm. I would take out treats once a week for the pigs, a little extra veggies and fruit along with their regular feed. I would visit them and made sure they were well taken care of. Some people got upset, said they were now pets and that I was heartless, but I would rather have an animal that was well taken care of and given respect. They were never pets, but animals that treated respectfully, and I was thankful for their life. Some people are disconnected from where their food comes from and what conditions the animal is raised in. Knowing that your lamb was raised in good conditions and that you could visit the farm it was on, helped you to have some awareness of farm animals, but at your young age, it may have been some miscommunication in that they framed it as a pet. Your mom may be upset because people may have been upset with her in the past for eating the lamb and she does not want to be seen in a bad light with your new in-laws. NTA. I think, in context, it was fine that your parents ate the lamb. Even better that you were self-aware that the decision was reasonable, so you ultimately seemed to believe it was fine. The only people that seemed to believe it was shameful or embarrassing were your parents, and that's their problem. LOL. If what she did was okay, then why is she being so upset now? Late doubts about how okay it really is to eat your own daughter's pet? Anyway, NTA, maybe if you didn't eat my fucking lamb, I wouldn't even have this story that embarrasses you. NTA, my dad grew up in New Zealand and had pet lambs head eat. It's something I'm still somewhat horrified by, but knowing my dad, it makes perfect sense, and it's something we throw back in his face and laugh at on a semi-regular basis. NTA, the story sounds exactly as bad as it is. That's on your mom, not you. I'm glad it has become funny to you now. They ate your pet without you there to also enjoy the meal. People reap what they sow. NTA. NTA, if she thought it was a monsterly thing to do, then why did she do it? You were not lying, you only revealed true facts of your mother and father and how they are as people, yet they seem to be angry about you showing their true colors. Might be that they knew were monsters for what they did, but clearly didn't care enough not to do it to their child. I suggest living at least 30 minutes away from them for a decent future, and be sure to monitor them with your children. They clearly think it's okay to be monsters as long as nobody tells. My mom was always on me to hide things from my husband so that our family doesn't look bad. She shouldn't have acted like a grade A wackadoodle if she didn't want people finding out. NTA. NTA. If your family do something, your family should at least own it. NTA. My family once found a really big crab on a beach walk and took it home to cook, and there was obviously some sort of miscommunication because my younger cousin thought we were taking it home as her pet crabby. Cue the waterworks when she realized her parents had boiled and eaten crabby for their dinner. NTA. Your mother is though. NTA. It's a pretty classic story if you live in the country. Also, it blows my mind that someone who eats meat and is obviously old enough to have adult kids hasn't had lamb. Might be a cultural thing, lamb is a very popular meat in my country. NTA. Did your family consider, not eating your pet? NTA. When I was a boy, my dad said I could get a rabbit but only if we end up eating it. NTA. This could be a story from any culture that eats meat. Kids in the US do projects where they raise chickens, ducks, lambs, calves, etc., and I'm sure more than one has thought of their farming project as a pet while their parents thought of it as food. It's not as though you broke down crying and causing a scene, you and your family have laughed about it for years. Why would you assume a funny family anecdote would suddenly not be funny to your mother when sharing it with the people you're bringing into your family? LOL, this sounds similar to my mom. NTA, seems as if there was no harm done, and honestly it's like keeping chickens or a pig. If your mom doesn't want to look like an asshole, she shouldn't kill her kids' pets and eat them. Your NTA, she is. NTA. They are lucky you are forgiving, and I think as an adult try not to do things that would be embarrassing if repeated. NTA. Growing up I had bunnies as pets, that were also food. Loved out pigs, also food. Chickens? Food. Anyone who eats meat and thinks it's cruel or rude to acknowledge the sacrifice of the animal that they are eating is an asshole. Food doesn't just come from the grocery store. It is grown, whether it's a plant or an animal. NTA. I honestly see nothing wrong with your story and found it funny, but I'm familiar with the whole pet being food thing from my aunt and uncle running a working farm with cows and ducks and chickens, and then there was hunting that would take place too. NTA. She shouldn't have eaten your pet if she doesn't want to be called a monster. Info. You don't casually have a lamb for a pet, you were young so no blame. What kind of story did you tell him? Did $10 include permanent housing and food plus vet visits? NTA. And that now my future in-laws thought they were monsters for eating my pet. Well, if the shoe fits. NTA. NTA. Your parents are, though. The problem isn't that they ate the lamb, the problem is the reaction to telling the story afterward. Your mother's behavior toward you in the present is not okay. NTA. My sister made friends with a goat on her paternal family's farm and ended up being goats too. Growing up in the city, she never thought of why animals are on farms. Life and death happen. NTA. I love a rack of lamb myself, but I would never eat my kid's pet. Just like I wouldn't eat my daughter's chicken, hell I wouldn't eat her chicken nugget behind her back. Why is she embarrassed by people knowing what she did? She was okay doing it, stand in your shit, people. NTA. My lamb was pork chop. I didn't know that was the outcome for them either. Mind you, the people who bought him made sure I knew they'd be absolutely honorable and not allow him suffering. His sister was kept for breeding by her buyers. It may be a normal thing and funny story, but the only bad aspect here is not communicating with you honestly at the time. I'm sure your mother will get over it in time. My grandmother used to give my mother and her siblings baby rabbits every so often, let them raise them for a few months, take them away, and she would have new baby rabbits. Yep, rabbits too. I'm 100% homegrown American, lots of people still do this all over the world, including the US. Where do people think meat comes from? NTA. If you're eating meat, it has to come from somewhere. You just had a story to go along with it. Your in-laws probably do not find the situation nearly embarrassing or shameful as your mom does. Hopefully you'll see other stories here that are similar that you can share with her so she doesn't feel so bad. NTA. I have a similar familiar story involving my mother and uncle. My grandfather raised a few cows for milk and they ultimately meat. In their case, they spent years with them. The story was often told about them eating beef one night after the animals had been slaughtered, about which one it was. This is a common occurrence with anyone with rural farm families. It's a reality and we should all be more aware of where our food comes from. NTA. If they didn't want you to tell people they ate your pet, then they shouldn't have eaten your pet. I have a very similar story about a cow. Uneasy face. Your mom feels guilty. NTA. Your mom is blowing this way out of proportion. It's a funny story and doesn't sound like you said it maliciously. Your fiancé is right, your mom is acting crazy. It's just her anxiety. Ignore it. NTA. NTA. I think your mom was definitely out of line to go on a rant out of anger and say your fiancé is going to leave you cause you're a family of monsters. Sounds like she was projecting what she really felt about herself onto you. That was crazy. Enta. But honestly, if my family ate my pet, I'd never forgive them. Maybe your mom should learn how to forgive like you. Esh. Eating your lamb was pretty harsh, but bringing up this story during your parents' first meeting with your fiancé's family was really tactless. NTA. My in-laws are ranchers. My mill was horrified when she realized my husband was telling me the cows' names and personalities. She was afraid I'd think they were barbaric. She was just afraid I was classist. If I was, my husband would never have married my city girl self. Nah. Your mom was concerned about making a good impression, and she feels that story showed her family in a bad light. I get it. Just tell her to relax and that everyone thought it was funny, nobody thought she was an abusive parent. If she doesn't calm down, then she is but if she stops freaking out I would just let it go. It is a funny story though. NTA. I raised sheep as a kid/teen and some would end up on the dinner table. People might think we're weird for that, but if you raise your own meat you know it's had a happy life and a quick death. vs the industrialized food sources are often treated horribly and sometimes die very slow painful deaths. So yeah, it's just a cultural difference I'm sure your fiancé's family will either understand. NTA. When I was 7 or 8, we lived in the suburbs of Los Angeles, California, USA, an area filled with transplanted Okie farmers who migrated when the Dust Bowl hit in the 1930s. Rabbit hutches and chicken coops were a common sight in backyards, as well as large vegetable gardens. I had a pet rabbit. Not knowing what was in store for him, I made sure he was well fed and watered. One night we had a new type of meat in the stew. I was heartbroken when I found out it was my soft and cuddly little friend. For decades I could not eat rabbits. I even turned down Welsh rarebit at a fancy restaurant because I thought it contained rabbit. I tell this story all the time. Why would you be monsters for eating a lamb that was never intended to be a simple wool farm? Yeah, you may have made it a pet, but deep down, you knew what it was for. You need to tell your other that the all-knowing people of Reddit said your future in-laws will not think your parents are monsters, especially if they are from the same culture as your family. NTA. But I kind of see where your mom is coming from. That's a kind of intense story to have come up when you are first meeting someone. Since you have gotten over it, you should have read the room. It's not like you were venting. You were telling a story. That's not dinner conversation. It's traumatizing and I do think your parents are monsters. Now so do your in-laws. Also, Your parents are assholes for eating your damn pet.